The streets of Los Angeles, slick with the remnants of an early morning drizzle, mirrored the muted gray of the sky above. On the corner of 7th and Main, a scrawny dog lay curled up against the cold concrete, its matted fur a patchwork of grime and scars. Passers-by barely glanced at it, their gazes fixed on their phones or the next destination. Just as the city's indifference seemed impenetrable, a sleek electric car slowed to a stop nearby. The driver's door opened, and out stepped a man whose face was recognized by millions, Elon Musk. As the wind tugged at his jacket, his eyes locked on the trembling animal, and for a brief moment, the relentless pace of the city seemed to falter. Elon Musk, a figure synonymous with innovation and ambition, was no stranger to moments of decision. Yet here, in the middle of downtown Los Angeles, his usual world of boardrooms and technological breakthroughs seemed distant. His tall frame stood out among the hurried masses, his expression unreadable as he crouched near the trembling dog. The smell of wet asphalt mingled with the acrid scent of exhaust fumes, a sharp contrast to the quiet scene unfolding on the sidewalk. The dog flinched as Elon extended his hand, its wary eyes darting between him and the crowd. Its fur, once golden, was now a muted brown, streaked with dirt and tangled with debris. A makeshift collar, no more than a piece of fraying rope, hinted at a life it had once known, one of belonging and love, now replaced by uncertainty and isolation. Around them, life carried on without pause. A street vendor's shout, the rhythmic clang of a distant construction site, and the persistent hum of engines blended into an urban symphony. But Elon seemed unfazed, his attention focused entirely on the fragile creature before him. He glanced around briefly, searching for signs of an owner, but the dog's appearance left little doubt. It had been abandoned, left to fend for itself in a city that often swallowed the forgotten whole. With a quiet determination, he spoke softly, as if trying to bridge the gap between them. "Hey, buddy. It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." His voice was calm, carrying a warmth that cut through the chilly morning air. The dog hesitated, its body tense, before finally allowing itself to be touched. Elon's hand rested gently on its head, and for a fleeting moment, the animal's shivering subsided. It wasn't much, but in that instant, something unspoken passed between them, a fragile connection in a world that had shown them both its harshest sides. As Elon rose, cradling the dog in his arms, his expression shifted. Beneath the composed exterior of a man who had conquered industries, there was something deeply human, a recognition of shared vulnerability. He turned toward the car. The small creature nestled against his chest, and in that moment, it became clear. This wasn't just an act of kindness. It was the beginning of something neither of them could have foreseen. The drive back to Elon's hillside estate was silent, save for the soft hum of the electric engine and the occasional whimper from the dog nestled in the passenger seat. Every so often, Elon would glance over, his mind a whirl of questions. How long had this creature been left to survive on the streets? What kind of person could abandon something so vulnerable? These thoughts were interrupted when the dog shifted, letting out a small plaintive bark that pierced the quiet. As they pulled into the expansive driveway, the scene was a stark contrast to the harshness of the city they just left. Rolling green lawns stretched in every direction, and the sleek lines of Elon's minimalist home rose against the horizon. Yet even in this haven of modernity and wealth, the dog's nervous tremor didn't cease. Its thin frame trembled as Elon approached with a bowl of water and a plate of chicken, setting them down gently on the patio. For a moment, the dog just stared, mistrust flickering in its tired eyes. Elon crouched down a few feet away, his presence unfreeting. "Go ahead," he murmured. "You've earned it." Tentatively, the dog edged closer, its hunger outweighing its fear. It devoured the food with a ferocity that made Elon's chest tighten. He didn't speak, letting the quiet moment unfold naturally. Yet, as the dog finished and sat back on its haunches, it looked at him, not with fear, but something resembling curiosity. That night, as the dog slept on a plush blanket in the corner of his living room, Elon found himself scrolling through adoption websites and rescue organizations. He had no intention of keeping the dog permanently. After all, his life was a whirlwind of meetings, projects, and international flights. A pet didn't fit into the carefully orchestrated chaos. But the search turned up something unexpected. A startling number of homeless and abandoned animals in the city, each with their own story of neglect. The statistics were grim, and for the first time in a long time, Elon felt powerless. He could build rockets and revolutionize industries, but could he change something so deeply entrenched in society? The dog stirred in its sleep, its paw twitching as if chasing a dream. Elon leaned back in his chair, the glow of the screen reflecting off his face. This wasn't just about one dog anymore. It was about something bigger, something that had been right in front of him, but invisible in the haze of his ambitions. Tomorrow, he thought, tomorrow we start figuring this out. The next morning, Elon stood on his patio, coffee in hand, watching as the dog explored the garden. The sun reflected off its wiry coat, patches of fur still matted and thin. It seemed hesitant, taking small steps as though the safety of its surroundings might suddenly vanish. Elon felt a pang of unease. For all his wealth and influence, caring for another life was uncharted territory. Internally, he wrestled with doubts. This wasn't his world. His expertise lay in engineering, algorithms, and systems, not in the messiness of emotions and healing. The dog's wariness mirrored his own. Both were stepping into unfamiliar territory. Elon had always prided himself on being a problem solver, but this wasn't a system he could optimize or a challenge he could solve with a prototype. Could he truly make a meaningful difference, or was he setting himself up to fail? Externally, the obstacles were just as daunting. As the day unfolded, Elon dove into research, his typical methodical approach now fueled by a personal drive. The statistics were grim. Tens of thousands of animals abandoned annually in the city, shelters overwhelmed and underfunded, countless stories of neglect and abuse. He reached out to experts, speaking with shelter coordinators and rescue volunteers. Each conversation painted a picture of a system stretched to its breaking point. "You can't just throw money at it," one volunteer told him during a late-night call. Her voice carried the exhaustion of years in the field. "We need infrastructure, education, and commitment. People need to care. It's not about resources, it's about hearts." Elon scribbled notes, the words heavy on his mind. The more he learned, the clearer it became that this wasn't a challenge he could face alone. He needed allies, but more importantly, he needed a strategy that went beyond superficial fixes. Meanwhile, the dog, a creature of survival, presented challenges of its own. It flinched at sudden movements and barked nervously at unfamiliar sounds. Even as it began to trust Elon, moments of fear would resurface, a stark reminder of its past. Elon found himself waking in the middle of the night to its restless pacing, unsure of how to comfort it. It was a lesson in patience and humility. For every small step forward, like the first time the dog wagged its tail, there were setbacks. Elon began to see parallels between the dog's journey and his own. Both required persistence, vulnerability, and a willingness to embrace uncertainty. The obstacles loomed large, but Elon was no stranger to ambitious undertakings. This, however, was personal, and that made all the difference. The journey of transformation, the days began to take on a rhythm, one punctuated by small victories and quiet struggles. Elon dedicated part of his mornings to the dog, now affectionately named Orbit, inspired by the space Elon often dreamed of conquering. Orbit's progress was slow but undeniable. The once distrustful dog now followed Elon around the house, its tail wagging tentatively, its eyes brighter than before. Elon, too, found himself transformed. His meticulously planned days began to include unexpected detours, visits to local shelters, long walks with Orbit, and conversations with animal welfare advocates. The research he once approached as a clinical exercise became personal, fueled by the bond he was building with Orbit. One evening, as the city skyline glimmered in the distance, Elon sat at his computer, drafting a plan. The idea was ambitious, but it was also grounded in the lessons he had learned from Orbit. It wasn't just about funding shelters. It was about creating a system that educated communities, provided resources, and ensured that no animal was left to fend for itself. The plan evolved through trial and error, much like Orbit's rehabilitation. Elon connected with veterinarians, behaviorists, and rescue organizations, listening to their needs and tailoring his efforts accordingly. He began funding mobile veterinary clinics to reach underserved areas and supported programs that paired rescue animals with veterans and individuals facing mental health challenges. Meanwhile, Orbit faced challenges of his own. The scars of his past didn't fade easily. During their walks, loud noises would send him cowering, and unfamiliar people brought out the same fear he had shown on the streets. But each day, Orbit grew braver. Elon celebrated every milestone: when Orbit let a stranger pet him, when he slept through the night without pacing, and when he began greeting Elon with excited barks. There were setbacks too, days when Orbit regressed, when his fear resurfaced unexpectedly. Elon learned to adapt, seeking guidance and leaning on the community of experts he had built. Through it all, he realized that progress wasn't linear, but it was still progress. Their bond deepened, each teaching the other lessons they hadn't anticipated. Orbit learned to trust, and Elon learned to slow down, to appreciate the small moments and the power of persistence. What had started as a single act of kindness became a journey neither of them had expected, one that reshaped Elon's perspective on responsibility, empathy, and the interconnectedness of all lives. Months into Orbit's journey of healing, Elon found himself standing in front of a modest shelter on the outskirts of the city. It was a facility he had funded to serve as a pilot program for his broader vision, a haven for animals like Orbit, where rehabilitation was prioritized as much as rescue. On this particular day, Elon had brought Orbit along. It was a symbolic visit, one meant to celebrate the progress made and to showcase the potential of what his initiative could achieve. But as they stepped through the gates, something unexpected happened. Orbit froze. His body tensed, his tail tucked between his legs, and his eyes darted wildly at the sight of other dogs behind chain-link fences. Elon knelt down beside Orbit, speaking to him softly. "It's okay, buddy. You're safe." But Orbit wasn't convinced. His panic escalated, and before Elon could intervene, the dog broke free from his leash, bolting across the yard and into a corner where he cowered, trembling. The sight was a stark reminder of Orbit's past. It hit Elon harder than he expected, a wave of guilt washing over him. Had he pushed Orbit too far? Had his efforts to help inadvertently caused harm? Elon took a deep breath, steeling himself. He didn't call for assistance, didn't rush to retrieve Orbit. Instead, he sat down a few feet away, cross-legged on the ground, and waited. He spoke softly, his voice steady and calm, recounting the day they first met and the progress they'd made together. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Staff and visitors looked on from a distance, unsure of what to do, but Elon stayed rooted in place, his patience unwavering. Slowly, Orbit's trembling eased. His ears perked up slightly at the sound of Elon's voice. And then, inch by cautious inch, he crept toward the man who would become his safe haven. When Orbit finally reached him, Elon didn't reach out or pull him close. He let Orbit come to him fully on his own terms. When the dog finally rested his head against Elon's knee, the moment felt like a victory more profound than any business milestone Elon had ever achieved. That day, Elon realized the heart of his mission wasn't just about rescuing animals, it was about rebuilding trust, one step at a time. And in that corner of the shelter yard, with Orbit leaning against him, Elon knew they were both finally ready to face the next chapter of their journey. The next few months brought an incredible transformation, not just for Orbit, but for the entire initiative Elon had envisioned. The shelter, now fully operational, became a sanctuary for animals who had endured hardships similar to Orbit's. Each success story that emerged strengthened Elon's belief in what was possible when compassion and innovation came together. Orbit, once timid and mistrusting, became an ambassador for the program. His story touched the hearts of many, and his presence at events and in the shelter offered a unique comfort to other dogs who arrived scared and uncertain. His calm demeanor and newfound confidence had a ripple effect, showing others, both animals and people alike, that healing wasn't just possible but powerful. Elon's involvement deepened in ways even he hadn't anticipated. What started as a rescue mission for one dog had grown into a mission that redefined his priorities. He invested in training programs for shelter staff, developed technologies to improve animal care, and even launched an app that connected adopters to animals in need, offering real-time updates on their rehabilitation journeys. But the greatest change was in Elon himself. The driven entrepreneur, known for his relentless pursuit of progress, now found joy in quieter victories. Sitting on the floor of the shelter office, surrounded by wagging tails and hopeful faces, he felt a sense of fulfillment that no technological breakthrough had ever given him. Orbit's bond with Elon grew unshakable. The dog followed him everywhere, becoming a constant companion not just in the public eye, but in the private corners of Elon's life. Orbit reminded him to slow down, to appreciate the small, profound moments that often got lost in the rush of ambition. The shelter's success sparked a movement. Donations poured in, and other shelters began to replicate Elon's model, focusing on rehabilitation and trust building. People who had followed Elon for his technological advancements now saw another side of him, one driven by empathy and a desire to give back. Orbit's journey from a cold sidewalk to a warm home became a symbol of hope, not just for stray animals, but for anyone who had ever felt abandoned or overlooked. And as Elon looked out at the growing network of shelters, he knew they weren't just saving animals, they were saving pieces of humanity too. It wasn't about changing the world in one grand gesture. It was about changing lives, one connection at a time. Elon sat in his backyard one quiet evening, the sky painted in hues of orange and pink as the sun dipped below the horizon. Orbit lay beside him, his head resting on Elon's lap, his tail giving the occasional contented wag. The peaceful rhythm of the moment felt almost foreign, a stark contrast to the endless chaos that had once defined Elon's life. Looking down at Orbit, Elon couldn't help but reflect on the chain of events that had brought them here. Rescuing a stray dog might have seemed like a small, unremarkable act in the grand scheme of things, but for Elon, it had shifted something fundamental. It had reminded him of the beauty and simplicity, the power of connection, and the responsibility that came with having the ability to make a difference. Orbit wasn't just a dog. He was a living testament to the impact of kindness and persistence. Elon thought of the other animals the shelter had saved, each with their own story of survival and resilience. He thought of the countless volunteers and staff who had poured their hearts into the mission, creating a ripple effect that went far beyond what he'd initially envisioned. For all his achievements in technology and innovation, it was this quiet, unassuming project that had brought him the most profound sense of purpose. He realized that while building for the future was important, the present held its own kind of magic, if only one took the time to notice it. Who would have thought, huh? Elon murmured, scratching orbit behind the ears. The dog tilted his head up, gazing at him with unwavering trust, as if to say, you did. Elon smiled, his mind drifting to the shelter's upcoming expansion plans. He knew the work wasn't over. There were still animals to save, shelters to build, and awareness to spread. But for now, he allowed himself to bask in the quiet joy of the moment. Orbit stretched out, his paws brushing against the cool grass, and let out a contented sigh. Elon leaned back, his eyes tracing the first few stars appearing in the night sky. Sometimes, the greatest innovations weren't about machines or systems, but about hearts and souls, those that needed saving and those willing to save. And as he sat there, his hand resting on the dog that had changed everything, Elon knew he'd stumbled upon something truly extraordinary, a purpose that grounded him, a legacy that spoke not just to progress, but to humanity.